Welcome to the Starting Over Stronger show, where you'll find help and hope for your divorce survival and recovery. Divorce well, live well.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Starting Over Stronger Divorce Survival and Recovery show. It is my pleasure to meet you here each week with the assistance and support you need as you face divorce. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast and written a review in the podcast app that you listen to or on Facebook or Instagram, would you mind pausing right now and doing that? I know how easy it is to forget, and it's so important as we aspire to reach more women. Your reviews and shares are helping us help more women just like you. So thank you. Today's guest is Samantha Compton. She is a financial advisor with Wise Wealth in Lee Summit, Missouri, and we are going to talk about wise women learning wealth. And I was first introduced to Samantha when I went through my own divorce and needed a wise woman in matters of wealth to help me make decisions during and after my divorce, to help me set up myself for the best financial future possible. And being a woman of divorce herself, she really got where I was coming from. And she made me feel like I wasn't being judged or less than because I was a stay-at-home mom for the previous 19 years or so, and for just not knowing about all this money stuff. And she patiently taught me what all the big words meant and how to strategically set up my budget, my accounts, my divorce settlement funds. Really, she was my rock in the financial world and still is. And so welcome, Samantha. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Annie. I'm so excited to be here. I'm just amazed at your journey. I mean, every time I meet a woman who has been through something as difficult as divorce can be, especially when you feel like you have a gap in some knowledge and you have to dig in and learn those things in addition to healing, it's kind of a big deal. And I've really seen an absolute transformation, but in yourself. But one of the big things that really stands out to me is remembering in some of our early conversations, and you were very raw in the beginning, but at the same time, you were absolutely determined that what you were learning, you were going to share. I mean, you were willing to share with other women what you were learning while you yourself were still recovering and still healing. And that was inspiring to me, and it still is. I love your journey and I love your mission that you're on. So it's really an honor to be here, and it's an honor to be your friend and advisor. So first of all, before we even get started too much, I just wanted to say my disclaimer here. So because I'm going to be talking about a lot of things, I'm going to be talking about financial things and investments, and I might even mention some tax kind of things, but I'm not a tax person, and I'm really also not giving any legal advice, and I'm not giving any financial recommendations. As a fiduciary, I really have to be very careful that nobody takes something I say as a recommendation without knowing their particular situation. So we got that out of the way.
Yes, thank you. And in fact, you mentioned being a fiduciary. That was a big part of what helped me to be comfortable in working with you. I knew that I had the assurance that you would never do anything that was not in my best interest. And it's not to say that other financial advisors would, but I just didn't know who to trust. I didn't know anything. And you came by recommendation from friends and business associates. And I just felt like, your approach to financial advising confirmed that you would always be looking out for what would help me. And you also took the time to, make me feel heard. And I know that, I help women, and there are women listening right now who may have felt like they've been silenced in matters of finances. And I just loved that you took all the time I needed to listen to me and learn about my life and to help me create plans that addressed all of my hopes and fears. And knowing that you'd been where I was and were able to rise up out of that for yourself to create a career in finance was very inspiring as well. So thank you for that. And if you would just, say hello to the listeners, share anything you'd like about yourself personally or professionally.
Sure. So I currently am a senior financial advisor with Wise Wealth, and I have always had a heart for women going through the changes of divorce or even losing their spouse. And along the way, I also have found out that a lot of women, even married women who are currently married, have the same concerns and issues about dealing with their finances, being in on that conversation. So going back for myself, so I was divorced, facing divorce around 40, and had never done any retirement saving for myself because I had been working part-time and at home part-time. I honestly didn't even know what a mutual fund was. And
I still don't.
Luckily I do now, but I didn't for a long time. And I don't know if you have ever felt like this, but I know that coming out of a marriage and then being a single mom and then trying to just recover and heal, but also then address all the things in my life that really needed paying attention to. I think if your listeners are like what you and I have experienced, there's those moments when you just feel like, oh, how am I going to know if I'm getting taken advantage of? Because I really don't know. I don't know this particular area. And I like to describe it kind of like going to the mechanic, because I remember going to the mechanic as a divorced woman with a car problem and thinking, I've got this big bullseye on my forehead right now because I'm coming in and I'm going, you know, the car's making the noise that goes like this. And I'm trying to, you know, and they're just looking at me and they can tell I know absolutely nothing. And they could easily come back to me and say, hey, you know, it's going to be $2,400 and it was X, Y, Z. And I have no way of knowing, is that true? Did they just open the hood of my car and make something up? You know, have they made something else worse? And it made me feel very vulnerable. And what I know about most women is we don't like feeling vulnerable, especially after a divorce, because we already feel vulnerable. And so what we're trying to do is help ourselves not feel that way. And so when it came to now all of a sudden being 40 and thinking, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? I started really digging into some financial things because I wanted to understand it, because it was like going to the mechanic for me. And so in that journey of really beginning to dig into it, because anytime I want to know something, I love research. So I really dug into this to try to understand it better, which led to becoming a financial advisor. And so that journey just has really helped me understand, because it was me sitting there in a chair thinking, I don't know what this term is. I don't know what I need to do next. And it was like all of these financial decisions were above my head, floating around in a flurry. And I had no idea where to start. Like, which one do I pick first? What step do I take first? And so that's really where I come from. And so as in my journey as a financial advisor, this is my 9th year. I have seen a lot of other women experience the exact same thing. And so my whole goal is to make things easy to understand, help women know where to start, and really walk with them. Because what you said was so important. You said you really needed somebody to just take the time with you. And I found that to be universally true, that sometimes we just need somebody to take the time with us and feel like they're with us. And that's really become my mission.
Yeah. And that's true across the board, not just in finances, but in anything. I mean, even as a real estate agent, when I refer to a lender, it's to a lender that's going to be willing to take the time to have a conversation with this person and make sure that they are getting all of their I's crossed and I's dotted and T's crossed, and know exactly what to expect, and, not push an application and a credit report on them when they just have questions and they're just kind of at the beginning of it. I look at it like service before the sale, and you always did that very well. And today we are going to be talking about being a wise woman who learns how to execute the divorce process and the financial decisions during and after the divorce to put themselves in the best spot financially. And, obviously divorce is a time of financial instability and struggle for everyone who goes through it. It's easy to feel that we're barely keeping our head above water. We may be trying to keep up with attorney's fees. We may be trying to decide whether to buy a house, refinance the family home, rent a new place for ourselves. our alimony or maintenance, as they call it now, or child support may not be what we anticipated or not coming in at all. And then maybe you have received or are going to be receiving a nice chunk of change and you feel lost as to how to utilize or protect or invest that. And so my first question for you today, Samantha, is where do you start with a woman who comes to you and says, I'm getting a divorce? What next?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So before I even answer that question, I'm going to say to the listeners that if you're in that situation, the very first thing that you want to do is find someone you can trust. And when I say that, a lot of people say, well, how do I know who I can trust?
Right.
Well, you can't totally know, right? But you can give it your best shot by working with somebody. So in regard to finances, when Annie mentioned that I'm a fiduciary, what that really means is that by law, I am required to only make recommendations that's in the client's best interest. So there's already the law on your side. That is how I'm registered. That's all the hoops I've jumped through in order to be a registered investment with a registered investment advisory firm so that I am a fiduciary. So I always recommend, it doesn't have to be me, but just find a fiduciary and then somebody that you feel really comfortable with. And if you feel like you can trust them, then choose to trust them. So whenever I'm talking with a woman and we're sitting down and we're just really trying to sort through everything, absolutely the very first thing, and it's really the first principle of financial planning, is that we're going to start with a plan. No investment decisions outside the context of a plan. And sometimes people think an investment decision is just what mutual fund you buy. And that's not true. Financial decisions of all kinds are investment decisions. Where am I going to invest my time? Where is my income going to come from? So we have to have some sort of a framework or a plan in the very beginning. And so what I usually do is just start by kind of backing up a little bit, finding out the overall situation, how much that woman is going to need in the near future in cash. Then I'm going to address, income need. I might even help walk her through just a basic budget. Most of the time, people kind of have an idea of what they're going to need. And then really look at what assets are going to be at play. And let me tell you that anytime you have assets in motion, meaning you're getting a divorce settlement through maybe you're, dividing of a 401k, or you've got, if you're a widow, maybe you have some life insurance money. Anytime you have those in play, you're going to start getting people giving you advice. It's just the way it is. Mm-hmm. And so without knowing the big picture, a caution, don't take anybody's advice that doesn't really understand your whole situation. If somebody starts trying to sell you a product and they keep talking to you about a product, I would really call that a red flag. Just step back from that. This is really early in the game to be making any big decisions about any products. First, we need to figure out where you're at, what your overall financial situation is before we start doing that. So that's really where we start. We start with a plan. Take a little time to really work that out. And it's a fluid plan because obviously the next few months things will change, and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I met you right in the middle of my divorce, and I had a pretty good idea by that point of what things were going to look like at the end. It was still all in motion, though. And yeah. I honestly was glad that you weren't a financial planner who charged by the hour, because I can see why, that would be preferable to somebody who'd vested in certain things. But I met my fair share of folks who were very, very nice people who I'm sure, meant the best for me, but just being as inexperienced as I was, it made me nervous that they knew so much more about all of this than me, and that that they might profit off of my risk, I guess. Working with you, I understood fiduciary duty because I have the same duty as a real estate agent. I have to represent my client's best interests at all times, even if a different decision would be better for me personally. Mm-hmm. Whether it helps me or hurts me, I have to do what's right and best for each individual client. And working with you as a financial planner who not you, but other financial planners who only get commissions and may steer me into a plan or a product, like you said, that pays a high commission to them. This happened to one woman I know who ended up with an annuity, and she lost a big chunk of its value when she dumped it post-divorce. Word of mouth is one way to find reputable financial planners, and of course their websites and the Better Business Bureau might be an even better way. But you've talked a little bit about fiduciary duty, what that means to you. Talk about how important it is to you, and how maybe some specific steps even about how someone could go about selecting a person who is going to help them make all these monumental decisions.
Yeah, that's really good. So the definition of fiduciary is really a legal obligation to act in the best interest of another party using a duty of loyalty and care. And I love that you're a fiduciary as well, Annie. So the easiest way, I think, the best place to start maybe in finding that is to look for working with a registered investment advisory firm. And that's called an RIA. Now, what you'll notice about RIAs is they're not going to be owned by a bank, an insurance company, or a brokerage firm. So they're not going to be a huge name. Mm-hmm. And that's really intentional. They should be independent. And if you think about it, it's not that any advisors in those capacities are doing anything bad, but remember that a bank has, share owners, insurance companies and brokerages. So they have other people that have some interest that maybe they want to steer their advisors toward or something like that. So in order to truly be fiduciary, by the very definition, you can't have a conflict of interest in that way. So an RIA firm is really what you're going to be looking for. And then I would just say, take the time to sit down with a few people and just, what does your gut say? I mean, I can't talk to men like that, but I can talk to women like that. I think we get a sense of whether we're going to be comfortable with somebody. Is this person going to walk with me? Is this person going to take time with me? And I think another really big component is education. I'm really passionate. And the reason that I am even at Wise Wealth is because Wise Wealth as a firm is very passionate about education. It's all throughout the client relationship, ongoing education. And the reason I say that that's so important for women is because I have seen, including myself, the more information you have and the better you understand things, the wiser and smarter decisions you will make, and the less emotional you will be about a lot of those decisions. Because when we understand things, the more we understand things, the less fear is involved. And fear really drives us to make decisions that sometimes are, or most times, are really not in our best interest. So I would just, when you're, look for an RIA firm and then sit down with 2 or 3 people at RIA firms. Are they going to educate as they go? Are they using words that you don't understand already? And you don't, none of us feel good about saying, hold on, I don't really understand what you just said. Yeah. So are they taking the time to check for understanding? And I think that going through that process, utilizing those things, I think you can find somebody that you feel good about working with.
Yeah. And I felt like self-deprecating humor was particularly effective for me at that moment. Okay, stop. I have no idea what that word means. But, it is a fact. I didn't. And, it was important to me to learn, just like you talked about earlier. You're kind of a researcher, you want to find things out. You want to understand things, pick them apart. I was the same way. And I guess what I kind of want to do now is just dig into some specifics, and everybody's situation is going to be unique and different, but then there are some ways that our situations are similar. And so I thought I'll just use some of my situations during my divorce as reference points, and we can kind of just talk around those. And then if there's other situations that you find that a lot of your clients are in that are different, then, please do just interject that as well. But my retirement, as I think of it, was kind of in 2 pots. One was my half of a 401k that, because I was a stay-at-home mom, our entire family income was his job. So he was the only one with a 401k. And so I got half of that. That rolled into an account of my own that, of course, I can't access till I'm 59 and a half. And I think you had set up, I don't know, mutual funds, money market. I have no idea. The words are lost on me, but I know that you did kind of a aggressive investment strategy because I'm in my mid 40s and there's time to set it and forget it, let it mature. I do peek at it every once in a while, but it's easy to leave it alone because I can't do anything with it, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm sure, obviously, if I was closer to retirement age, you might, advise structuring that in a less risky way. But I think it was a good way to do it for me. Now, the other half of what I think of my retirement as is actually half of the stock account that my ex had earned in his employee stock plan. And that is not something that is off limits to me between now and 59 and a half. And that could be a good thing or a bad thing, right? So I have to be very smart with that. And as I'm sure I've mentioned before, my career development was not something in the plan for my ex and I. So the employee stock plan was ours. I wanted to be a homemaker and he wanted me to be. There were times in the marriage that I do really kind of wrestle with that. And I kind of attempted in different ways to set myself up to at least start some career endeavors. None of those ever really panned out, partly because I was overloaded with all of the stuff that, was needed to be done at home. And part of it was because ultimately he wasn't really supportive of that because he was making good money and he kind of wanted me to be available to him and the kids to support him in that role. And I think that ended up being a good thing in the end with my divorce because I feel like, and this might just be my feeling, it may not be truth, that judges look at that and they see that women have a part in supporting his ability to provide in that way, that we kind of together made it possible for him to have that demanding and well-paying job, Yeah. And I wanted to be married forever. I mean, honestly, I had goals and dreams, but they were always secondary to the big plan to stay married and for him to be the provider. And so I poured myself into the family, the kids, the marriage, and did all that I could so that he could build a lucrative career. And he did. And rightfully so. Like I said, the state, as it seems, at least in most cases, upheld the standard that if a woman forgoes her career development for 10 or 20 or 30 years and the spouse enjoys the benefit of her dedication to the home, she gets to enjoy the benefit of a fair split if the marriage ends. Furthermore, though, they often apply that principle to the establishment of alimony and maintenance. And we'll get into that a little later. For me, though, this principle allowed me to inherit a large chunk of shares of a well-known and growing stock. And these aren't traditional retirement funds. So I can access them before age 59 and a half. And I want to hold this money in my mind as retirement because as a wise woman, or at least one trying to grow in wisdom financially, I know that money is working hard for me every day. And I'm so thankful to have you to have conversations like we did just this week as I endure these leaner years, as I struggle to begin and develop a career that most women did in their 20s. And let's just say I'm not in my 20s. But anyway, I bring this up because I know that women who have been a little less wise about this lump sum have accessed it and even, drained it in some cases and are really struggling now. So I guess what I want to do is just kind of talk about what your thoughts are for the ladies listening on how to execute these retirement investment funds during and after their divorce. Like, what are the most important things for them to know and to keep in mind when we're thinking about these things?
Oh, that's really good. I love how you talked about what you were feeling during all of, that time period, because I see that so much. It's not, and I experienced it myself. It's not like you just get divorced and you go, okay, now I'm moving on to this next thing. I mean, you want to be there. I mean, like you might be there 1 minute and then you're not the next. And so there's this grieving of what you thought would happen while you're really needing to address what is actually going to happen in reality in the future. And so there is a challenge getting through that. And it's not like you can just delay making decisions because you're still grappling with what isn't going to be. You still have to. So I think what will really protect a woman in that position to help her own mindset is to, number one, like we talked about, just start with that plan. And no investment decisions outside the context of that plan. But then in addition, and it's just another twist on this, that the plan that you're developing will determine what you do with those assets. So just as an example, so when you were, really looking at your situation and trying to figure out, how am I going to fund this? How am I going to fund this? So if you can think of a framework in your mind as we're talking, and there's really 3 buckets that almost everybody pre-retirement and post-retirement are all dealing with in regard to their finances. And the first one, and this is, by the way, how we do planning at Wise Wealth, we address left to right these buckets. And so the first one we start with is the liquid bucket. And that's really anything that needs to be kept liquid or on hand in cash for any immediate needs. Any needs that are known in the next 3 years, especially, sometimes will go as long as 5 years. Any emergencies, anything we know is going to be an expense. And sometimes that's legal fees. Sometimes that's, I'm going to have maybe I'm going to give myself the next 3 months or 4 months to really find a full-time position. Whatever it is, we are going to make sure that bucket, if it's at all possible to do it with this group of assets that are going to be given to this, or, not given, but split, and the woman is going to be able to have, we want to address that bucket first. So very first, I remember, Annie, we talked about what you were going to need to have on hand in order to do what you needed to get done. And so you had some money coming in, you were going to maybe need some additional funds, that kind of thing. So the first thing we did was address that liquidity need and make sure that none of those funds were at risk in any way. In other words, most of the time that's going to be in a savings account or a money market, something where there's really no risk to that money being there when you need it. Does it earn much? No, but that's really not the point. The point is that it's there. And sometimes women think, am I being stupid because I'm holding on to this money that I might need and I'm not earning anything on it? Absolutely not. You're not being stupid. It's very smart to make sure there's no risk to funds you have to have in the next few years. And then the next bucket we're going to look at is the income bucket. Now, during our working years, the income bucket is really funded by whatever career we have or job or something like that. When we get into retirement, we address the income bucket a little different way. But so most of the time, the income bucket is really, going to be funded with what needs to happen as a career or job. And so many times when I'm talking with a woman going through divorce, she's a little overwhelmed by what she's going to be doing. And so the focus on bucket number 1 brings her a little relief as she addresses bucket number 2. And so then anything that's not needed for bucket number 1, bucket number 2, or if she's not able to access it yet, like you mentioned, there are some accounts that, women really need to be over 59 and a half to access. And let me say this real quick. Sometimes women say, they plan to dip into that bucket before they're 59 and a half, maybe because they don't have any other choice. Okay, well, that's a whole different thing. But I highly recommend never dipping into that, because the penalty you have to pay along with the taxes you have to pay, it's just really not worth it. Even to pay off debt, you end up shooting yourself in the foot, costing you so much more than even the interest would have cost you on the debt. So having said that, the next thing that we look at is the growth bucket. And the growth bucket is what you're referencing when you're talking about your split of the 401k. And so what goes in that bucket? Well, the plan determines the product. So we would want to look for the most efficient, cost-effective way of getting growth there. And like you mentioned, you were in your 40s. So realistically, you had at least 20 years before you were going to retire. You could afford to take risk in that bucket. It should be wise risk. There's more risky ways and less risky ways to have growth in that bucket, but we wanted to do it at the lowest cost, and then be able to leave those alone until the time that you were going to be retiring. So really those two principles, no investment decisions outside the context of a plan. So get that plan. And number two, the plan is going to determine the product. So really that framework we're developing is really answering those questions. And then we get to sift through the things that are there and say, okay, what is going to help us address this liquid bucket the best? And what's going to help us address this, growth bucket the best from what you have? And that kind of brings some order to the chaos that a lot of women have, or that flurry of thoughts and pieces that are going on, having that framework.
Yeah. And ladies, I hope you're listening and writing notes, because those buckets are important and they will really help you frame a lot of this, to make decisions, whether you have an advisor or you have to make decisions on your own, knowing that concept of the liquid income and growth buckets, and the fact that the plan always determines the product. In other words, you decide what's going to happen and then you back yourself into that and stick to that. And I think that right there alone, if you get nothing else out of today, that is how you become a wise woman of wealth. And so thank you for sharing that, Samantha. Obviously, every woman listening today needs to review what companies' plans and strategies work best in her unique situation, and that will hopefully be with the help of a qualified fiduciary advisor. What are some of the pitfalls that you have seen or often see with women investing in divorce?
Absolutely. This is a great question, because I've personally witnessed it, even in a relative situation, watching them before I was an advisor and now understanding a lot better. But I think one of the pitfalls that most women fall into is making a decision based on an emotion that is overwhelming them at the time. And I would say for most women, it's fear. Yeah. They've just been rocked. Their world has just been rocked, whether it's through divorce, death, whatever. It's something unexpected. And so that fear can easily rise up when we're dealing with something that we don't feel like we have a grasp on or a handle on. And so that's when we're really vulnerable. And in fact, in a class I teach about retirement, one of the things I talk about is that we should never make an investment decision based on fear or greed. And so I do find that it tends to follow male, female, not always, but sometimes I find men kind of fall into the pitfall of greed a little bit easier, and women fall into the fear a little bit easier. But both of them are just as powerful, because we're fueled by that. Those emotions are very compelling emotions. And so the secondary part of that is that because they're compelling emotions, you're going to see it in print, you're going to hear it on television or radio. When you see a product presented, and if they can hit a pain point of you're not getting what you should, or you may lose everything, those two things, that fear and greed, or greed and fear, are really going to compel most people to act. And so that's why it's used a lot in advertising. So in my class, I teach my students, I just say, hey, if you're reading something or listening to something, and it's not just like, wow, I should pay attention to that, I should be concerned about that, but it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so afraid now. If you feel those kind of emotions, step back from those, because those are generally on purpose to get somebody to be compelled to take action. In other words, it can be a sales tactic, and we don't want to fall prey to that. So a very dear person in my life had lost her husband and had a salesperson, really. And I'm not, when I say salesperson, I'm not saying that being a salesperson is bad at all. What I'm saying is, somebody trying to sell something with no consideration of the person they're trying to sell to, played on a lot of her fear. And I think you just shared an example of that a little bit earlier too. And she ended up having products that honestly were not at all appropriate for her, but she did it because she was compelled by fear. She was almost frozen. And so that's one pitfall. And then the next one I'll just address quickly is just making a lot of decisions very quickly before you've had a time to really work through what your situation is going to be and you've developed that plan. If you start just making decisions right off the bat based on, just I have to get something done, it might be better just to wait just a little bit and walk through that with somebody who's got a little bit less emotional look at it and help you get that plan in place.
Yeah. And, I'm thinking about some of the specific things that I did when I got my divorce settlement and, try to think back, was there fear? Was there greed? Was there rush? And it's hard to say because some people, everybody has different feelings about these kinds of things. But like, for example, I could have financed a car, but I personally decided to just pay cash for a new car. I needed to know that I would have something that would be reliable. I didn't know what my monthly income was going to be. So it made sense to me. I've got this lump sum. Let me just get this big expense out of the way. Sure. And then I don't have that payment every month. So that worked well for me. Yeah. I also paid off all my student loans for the same exact reason and bought a house with the down payment, from my divorce settlement. So, this included splitting a savings account and some home equity. And it allowed me to put a decent down payment on the house. And I bought modest so that I would have as low of a payment as possible because mortgage payments are always less than rent. So I did have to rent for a year and a half, but then was able to buy after that. And, honestly, I wish I could say that I would be able to get it paid off before, my alimony expires, which is an excellent strategy for any ladies who can't. But because I can't, I'm just paying extra every month in chunks towards the principal whenever I can, because I want to, get it paid off as soon as possible because it's a 30-year loan and I don't want to still be paying on a house when I'm in my 70s, right?
Right. Real quick, I just want to say that everything you just shared, you put thought into it. In other words, you didn't make any of those decisions just spur of the moment without thinking through them, without thinking about why you were making that decision. And I think that's the difference, is being intentional. I'm doing this because, and I've reasoned through it, and I've looked at all the outcomes, the potential outcomes, and I've chosen that this one is the closest I can get to what I feel like is best.
Yeah.
That's important.
And, you really have to put a lot of thought into it because there's a lot of variables in all of these different situations. One of my divorce coaching clients just had a plan to use her part of her settlement to pay off the mortgage early on the house that she kept. And that became a big problem when she discovered a 10% penalty for early payoff. And that was not something that she knew, in advance. So she would have, made very different decisions possibly, given that set of circumstances. And so you really have to know the fine print in every situation and know what questions to ask. And furthermore, have professionals in your life who you can trust to give you the straight answers that are for your best interest, not just theirs. Yeah. And this is actually one of my favorite ways that I help my clients is making those connections for them. I have a team of divorce professionals, lenders, financial advisors, lawyers, insurance people, and so on, who I can refer to given a specific set of circumstances. I can say, call this person or call these 2 people or 3 people or whatever, because I know with certainty that these are people that will not take advantage of you, that, everyone that I can refer you to is someone that has expertise in all the nuances of divorce. And they're also a person of integrity. So you don't have to worry, Yeah. We've all heard cash is king. What other thoughts do you have about these kinds of strategies for freeing up cash, reducing monthly expenses, and so on, so that we can have more to put in that growth bucket?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So strategies for freeing up cash and reducing monthly expenses. So really, I think being realistic about what those expenses are going to be. It's very funny when I get ready to do a planning session with somebody who's been through the class, the class that I teach. A lot of times I'll have to prep them and say, hey, one of the questions I'm going to be asking you is how much income do you need? Mm-hmm. And the fact that most people cannot accurately answer that question it should be paid attention to. In other words, if you have never sat down and used a basic budget form, and you can find that anywhere on the internet, and just really be aware. Don't try to say, well, I need this amount of dollars, but you don't really have it broken down in your mind. You really need a realistic picture, so that then you know how much cash you're going to have. Reducing monthly expenses. Sometimes people have a lot of especially, let's say you've been married for a long time and you're just used to spending money on things that really aren't necessary, but they're something you'd like to keep. Mm-hmm. And the hard part of going through a divorce is sometimes we have to look at our budget a different way. And it's maybe not even our fault that we're in that position, but we have to kind of be willing to separate those things out. So I like to have people look at their budget like living expenses and lifestyle expenses. So the living expenses are your basics, like you got to have it. You can't live without these things. They're going to be there. They're just a given. And then lifestyle expenses could be like getting my nails done, or going out to dinner, 3 or 4 times a month, or whatever that is. It's not saying that you can't have those things, but it's really good to break those two numbers apart from each other, so that as you kind of dig into your finances going forward, you know what your essentials are. Mm-hmm. And then if you can start adding some other things in there. So it becomes very easy. If you need to cut, the first place to go to do that.
Yep.
And then one other thing that I've seen some people get into doing, and I'm not saying everybody can't do it, but I will tell you that I've seen it fail more often than I've seen it succeed. So it's a cautionary place. And that is, sometimes women will use 0 credit or 0% interest credit cards. Mm-hmm. I want to earn points. I want to just be able to pay once a month and get this done. And especially in the early months of being divorced.
Right. And you're not saying you don't need things. You're just saying the same rules should apply whether you're using cash or you're using a 0% interest credit card. Exactly. Do you really need this?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then just really, I think one thing that you're doing in the first 6 to 12 months is really getting an idea of what is this new life going to look like. You're not going to get it exactly right off the bat. You're going to have to figure out, okay, this month I spent this much on this. And, you're kind of figuring this out as you go. Most women about a year in from their divorce have a really pretty good idea of how much they're spending and how much they need. And so keeping the cash on hand to have a cushion in that liquid bucket gives them the ability to just not be so stressed as they're figuring this out. And cash is king. I mean, I think once we are spending cash and we're not putting on a credit card, we're paying more attention to what things cost, and we're more aware of what we're spending. And that helps us reduce monthly expenses and all the other things that we may have to address later on.
Mm-hmm. And, speaking of budgeting, you had mentioned there's lots of different options online. I've always used everydollar.com because it's got a free budgeting app that you can pay, I think, $10 a month if you want to link your bank accounts to it. And then you can automatically categorize things and really get a really good picture of your income and expenses. Do you know of others that do that?
Actually, I don't, because I use the same one.
Oh, okay. Well, so hey, it must be a good one.
Okay. Personally, I use the same one. I know there are others out there. I will also say too, there's a lot of value for those who just are paper people, pen and paper people. Mm-hmm. It's a great exercise. Get a spiral-bound notebook and just start writing it down. Yeah. Some people do better that way. Some people do online. I think Every Dollar is a great one. Mm-hmm. So there are many out there. You can get it, but I would say don't get also too caught up in the detail. Yeah. Because sometimes that freezes us up too. We're trying to get it so perfect that we just give up altogether because it's never perfect, and that isn't necessary.
Yeah. That's true. And if you really need a lot of help in this area, there is an earlier episode of the show on budgeting with a budget coach, Amy Stutzler. She's amazing. She's a really positive person. And whereas you, Samantha, kind of do this big picture planning stuff, Amy's like that person that comes in and says, okay, what's really important for you to spend? Do you need this? Do you want that? She doesn't even like structure it from a standpoint of, if you have a $5 coffee habit that you can't keep having that, but what
Right.
needs to shift if that's going to happen, and what are your goals and how do we get you there? And she's super helpful in doing that with women. So I always
I'm
like
gonna
to
look her up. She sounds like a
plug her.
fantastic resource.
Yeah. It's helpful because, what you do and what she does are very different things, very both important, but still very different. And, so I just wanted to kind of talk about some other ways of making some more liquid in your bucket. And one of those is to sell your unwanted jewelry. And obviously that includes that wedding ring. And the caution here is just not to expect to get anywhere near what it's worth, because at resale, it's a frighteningly small fraction of what it is at retail. You can get online different bidding auction places that can give you a value. They'll even let you send it in and they'll appraise it, and you can get a really good idea of what it's worth. But they're also going to tell you, whether or not, it depends on where you sell it as to how much you're going to get for it. You can put it at auction, you can sell it to a friend, you can put it on Marketplace, you can exchange it at a jewelry shop for other jewelry. That's actually the best way to get value out of it. But it's hard to get what it's really worth, but and then some people choose to do other things with it, make another piece of jewelry out of it for themselves or for their child. There's a lot of different things you can do with it. But speaking of freeing up liquid, we wanted to just mention that, the wedding ring could be a nice chunk. Cleaning out every box, closet, cabinet, and drawer in your house. Of course, this is easier if you're already moving anyway, but even if you're not, this can be huge. Decluttering not only helps you out financially, but emotionally. And even if you give some of it away instead of selling it, doing a massive purge of all your household items is a great way to start your emergency fund. You can use Marketplace, eBay, Facebook, just word of mouth on your social media to share your items, and then set that money aside in an account where you're not penalized if it's removed at any time. In other words, not a CD, but it's there for you if you need it, just in a basic savings account. And also it's kind of hard, but one thing that I think was really helpful for me was having an automatic payment withdrawal from each paycheck and putting that into savings account. So it's kind of like set it and forget it again. Even if you can only spare $20 a month, that can accumulate over time. And, you can have your work even direct your deposit into 2 different accounts. So you never see the money and it builds automatically for you. CDs can be an effective tool as well, right, Samantha?
Absolutely.
Why don't you talk a little bit about that, how those work?
CDs, it's at a bank, and so it's going to be FDIC insured, so it's not going to be a risk. You can get a little bit more usually. Now, funny enough, not always in the low interest rate environment that we're in, but I generally will tell women, if keep still the money that you anticipate needing within the next at least 18 months completely liquid, like in cash. And then if there's some additional on top of that, that's more like your 3-year money, that kind of thing, then consider like a 12 or 18 month CD. If you can get a decent rate on a CD that makes it worth, having a little less liquidity, as far as you maybe have to pay a penalty to get out of it. But I think that they can definitely help get a little bit more return on that money.
Yeah. And what about like mutual funds and money market accounts? I'm saying words that I don't really know what they mean. So tell me if there's any value here in, women knowing about these things.
Sure. So money market accounts are bank accounts. They're like savings accounts, but they generally will have a little bit more interest, a little higher interest rate than just a traditional savings account. So that's something that you can look into. It's going to work a lot like a savings account. Mutual funds. So for your growth bucket, that's generally where we're going. Well, that's always where we're going to use things like that. So mutual funds can be a good option. I probably use ETFs or exchange traded funds much more than mutual funds. ETFs work a lot like mutual funds, but they tend to be less expensive on the inside. So what the costs that you don't see, but are still there and can affect your return, they tend to be much lower cost. You can get a lot of diversification through ETFs. So a lot of advisors are using ETFs for long-term growth. I think they can make a lot of sense. Again, that plan determines the products, is really going to come into play again. Mm-hmm. So there's, when I'm teaching the class, a lot of times I'll say, hey, anybody want to know the secret to investing success? And everybody just kind of laughs. And I'm like, this is taking the class. So there's really two things. There's two things that are the key to investing success. And the first one is time. Mm-hmm. And the second one is discipline. And I would say of those two things, sometimes the discipline is the harder part. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the time too. And so there is no magic investment out there, meaning as you're looking with your advisor at your growth bucket, there's all kinds of tools, all kinds of investments that you can use within that growth bucket. If you have at least 5 years or longer that you're investing for, then you can afford to take some risk because, just like Annie with your industry, you don't care what your house is worth from day to day. Mm-hmm. When do you care what your house is worth?
When you are getting ready to sell it.
That's right. It's the exact same concept with investments. So that's when you're going to care about what it's worth. In the meantime, give it the time to do what it's going to do. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to get growth, are you going to be down sometimes 20 or 30%? You could, you might, as long as you don't need that money and you don't have to sell it when it's 20 or 30% down, let it go. And if you're very diversified and you have a proper allocation, and allocation just means how much stock or how much risk is in your portfolio versus how many bonds. And that allocation is going to be determined really by your own situation and what your goals are. And then you want broad diversification, meaning you want to be invested in a whole bunch of things in different sectors so that if there's gain out there to be had, you get to participate in some part of it because you're broadly diversified to be able to get that kind of return. But there is no magic investment. So it's really like some people are saying, what's a hot fund? There really isn't such a thing. The history of the markets tell us that if you're in there long enough, you really can't beat the market, what the market overall will do in the long run. So it's just really about being diversified and having the proper allocation. So, time and discipline is really, really important. And so what I have learned about women is this is wonderful. When women take the time to make a plan and they continue to learn, and they even just understand the framework and how the framework works, they have the capacity to be more disciplined in sticking to that plan than most men I know. Mm-hmm. So when I'm working with a couple, and let's say she's never been in the conversation, and she gets now and she's in the conversation, which by the way brings a ton of balance to that conversation about the future. Yeah. With that couple, once she gets it and he starts at some point going, well, maybe we should invest in this. She'll go, you know what? No, I know why we're doing what we're doing. This is what we've got. This is my liquid bucket. This is our growth bucket. And once she gets those concepts, she's usually the one that is able to stick to that strategic plan because she gets it. Yeah. And she tends to be the disciplined one. So I love working with women and helping them understand because they end up being very successful.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And I love the analogy, the house is an investment. I mean, the fact is you can't control their value over time. So what you have to do is to figure out what you can control. Yeah. And, like with the house, obviously that's maintaining it well, keeping it updated, making sure that it's going to hold the most value possible on the end. And with investments, like you said, that's just planning, learning, and sticking to the plan.
That's
and
right.
so I think that goes a long ways. And I think that's really about all I've got for today. I would love to open up the mic for you to share anything else you think is important for ladies facing divorce to consider in regard to becoming a wise woman of wealth.
Sure. So I really just have a few points just to review. So becoming a wise woman in wealth, I would just say take these 4 steps. And the number one thing is to find somebody you trust. You can trust, whether you go by a fiduciary, which is what I recommend. Once you find that person, trust them. The second thing is develop that plan. Make sure you have that plan, and don't make any big financial decisions until you have that plan. Number 3, execute the plan. So you've got it, now execute it and stick to it. And then the 4th thing is to continue to learn. Work with somebody who cares about continuing to help you understand. And that, especially like in turbulent times, or, earlier this year, we had some volatility with COVID, and, it's so helpful to have somebody you feel comfortable enough with. You could just pick the phone up and go, hey, I know I want to stick to this, but I'm feeling fearful, and I just need you to talk me through what's happening right now. Help me understand. And then help me understand how my plan is responding to what's happening. Do I need to worry? Those kind of things. Find that person that can really help you continue to learn, because you're going to feel empowered by that. And it's going to make you more confident going forward in your singleness. And I just think that's super important.
Well, I may or may not have done that exact thing within the last week. So I totally agree. And thank you again, Samantha, for taking the time to shed some light on all this fuzzy, dark stuff and creating and managing a lifestyle that leads women to understand wealth, especially during divorce. It's such a critical concept to grasp. And listeners, I really hope that you feel smarter after what you've heard today. If you have additional questions for Samantha, I would love to make a personal introduction. Just email me at Annie@startingoverstronger.com. If you do happen to contact her directly, do please let her know you heard her on the Starting Over Stronger show. And if you don't already know, I am a certified divorce coach and divorce realtor. If you're making real estate decisions during your divorce, we honestly need to talk. There are some uncommon approaches to common issues that you need to know about and will likely not hear elsewhere. Also, if you feel overwhelmed and lost, tired of pulling on your friends who don't know how to help you, or running up your attorney's fees with needs that he or she would probably prefer you meet elsewhere, there is help. It's called divorce coaching. It may seem like an emerging industry, but the truth is it's been around for 20 years, and it's just beginning to expand into the Midwest here where I am, and gaining momentum within the legal community as more and more attorneys are seeing the value of having more credible clients who are prepared to do the business of divorce because of this critical support. So ask your attorney if they have heard of divorce coaching and if a divorce coach might be right for you in your situation. You can even ask him or her to contact me if you would like that, if they would like that assurance. And I have completed a certification endorsed by the American Bar Association. So the help and hope that we talk about often on this show comes to you simply in a personal format to allow you to explore your options with a thinking partner who understands divorce. It helps you not feel lost and overwhelmed the entire time, and really is such a blessing for you to make that investment in themselves. So check out startingoverstronger.com for more information, and you can schedule a discovery call there if you would like to know more. That is my gift to you. And whether you decide to invest in coaching with me, you will leave that call with more clarity about your next best steps. So thank you for tuning in today. And remember, wherever you are in the divorce process, Starting Over Stronger coaching and podcast is here with the help you need as you divorce and hope as you are starting over stronger.